Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. That was like a CV read then, wasn't it? So I need to update. I'll get a copy of that. So thanks, everyone, for joining. What I'm going to do today is talk about some of the perhaps unforeseen value of IoT, other than what's been publicized a lot in the media and by companies and by everybody. And also give you a bit of a view in terms of the areas in which we're looking at Konica Minolta. Before I do that, I'm also going to talk about Konica Minolta very, very quickly, just to give you an overview. So you've got a context of where we're coming from and why I'm saying the things that I'm saying. And then I'm going to present a bit of a hypothesis that we have in terms of where we think some medium-term development is going to happen in the marketplace. And again, I'm going to do it as quickly as I can, go through it, because I'd like to get people's feedback and I'd like to talk to anybody that's interested. We've also, for Technology London Week, we've also published a white paper, so I think you may have that where you're sitting, or you can come and visit us. So again, if we have an opportunity to talk afterwards, that would be great. What I'd like to do is talk at the moment about IoT. So everywhere you go, and certainly this week, here and everywhere else, you are swamped with conversations and comments on IoT and what IoT is going to be. And I'm hoping most of the people here know what IoT is. If you're not, I'm very happy to explain that a bit later on, or you can come and visit us, or you can go to many of the other stands here that are talking about it. But basically, what I want to talk about is what is the subsequent value up and beyond what is actually going on now. And the reason I want to talk about that is that what we have really is a bit of a, like cloud was, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everybody's talking about it, so everybody's getting excited. So everybody's beefing up the market in readiness for some value that's going to be realized at some point, right? It's still pretty unclear, other than single strands of vertical solutions or offerings, what that real big value is. So Konica Minolta, we're doing quite a bit of work in that area too. So before I go on and talk more about the subject of that and introduce a couple of the hypotheses we have, I want to talk about Konica Minolta. So just in case people don't know that, most people know us for cameras or printers. We are a relatively large company. We do much more than that. We are about 40,000 people, around about, or hedging up to about 10 billion euro revenue each year. And we have about 1,600 folks in R&D, and we have a large percentage of our operating profit is spent on R&D and the development. So we have a very wide portfolio too, which includes multifunctional devices in the office, healthcare connected systems. We also do material sciences, and even somewhat more obscure things like planetarium systems as well. So Konica Minolta is a very old company. It's 142 years old, but we have. And I can testify to this by coming into Konica Minolta just recently. It has a very unique startup mentality that you don't normally get on larger companies, I think, and which has been quite a pleasure to work with him. But anyway, there's been a whole series of innovations over the years. I think we also the cameras were the first cameras up in space as well that were used on NASA missions. Of late, we've developed what we call business innovation centers and a global connected network. And the reason for that is what we want to do is accelerate the way in which we bring new things to market, but we also want to do it more and more in collaboration with partners and clients and customers. We want to actually engage in real time in our development in the markets, rather than what a lot of large companies do is operate centrally on central hypotheses build them out into the marketplace and then release them. We want to do it in real time. We also have part of the program, the BICs, we have another program called Leading Edge Partners, where we engage with smaller startups. We have a fund for that, as well as integrated strategic alliances program, as well as a strong mergers and acquisition arm as well. During the last year or so, we've been developing what we think will be our future portfolio. So we are predominantly a manufacturing company the last few decades, but we've moved more and more into services and IT, and some areas like digital workplace and digital healthcare, we're now accelerating, building brand new offerings in that area. We're also looking at other broader technologies as well, sensors and information automation, which I'm going to cover on the IoT work that we're doing at the moment. For those who are interested and want to engage with us, we have developed a technical radar on the key technologies under those business themes that we want to investigate and work with. So either co-innovate with clients and customers, or invest in small startups, or work with strategic partners, or carry out principal areas of R&D. These are the areas. So if you're interested in working with us, and we very much welcome engaging with the wider technical community as much as possible, please come and have a look at that radar, or come and talk to us over that stand. So what I'm going to talk about now is the hypothesis, right? So at the moment, IoT, billions of connected devices we're going to have, and sensors, and everybody's working on data streams and business logic that represent their own area of which they think they can position their success around. But what is happening is something a little bit deeper than that people aren't fully aware of. So, well, some are, but a lot aren't, because the hype is so deafening, you can't hear anything else, right? So I want you to talk about what that could possibly be. So the basic hypothesis is this, right? That we talk about physical and digital worlds. We talk about those things being somehow separate, right? We also talk about things that are somewhat out of our control or somewhat unpredictable. Well, the hypothesis is this, that we are part of a chemical world, right? Whether it's digital, whether it's the way you think, whether the things you put down, whether it's a train taking off, whether it's somebody landing on the moon, it's still part of a physical world. And that physical world, that chemical world, has a structure, right? It has patterns, right? And we're unable, it is very, very complex, and it will be not fully understandable for centuries to come. However, what's happening with IoT is the start of a digital plug-in into our environment and our chemical world. The digital environment is also allowing us to connect more and more into our own consciousness thoughts, and more importantly, how we detect and engage with the environment and our work life and our home life and everything else. So this ever-growing connection into the environment, whether it be simple things like measuring traffic, or something more sophisticated like cancer detection, or something even more sophisticated like deep sensory work within a specific scientific field. They all come together, and those things have patterns. Now, once you understand those patterns, those things that seemed impossible to understand or are even unrelated are not, right? So some things, the more we get understanding of, the more we will gain a massive insight into what we are, what we want to do. And I think that there we go. That this will give us something that is it'll give us something that is beyond what is being presented to us now about having access to information and access to limited areas of data that we may be able to use. What it is going to do is going to give us access, right, to major insight of unrelated things, right? Those unrelated things will be coupled together, and we'll be able to make much better decisions. Insight, and this is the second hypothesis, that it will provide additional shattering changes in our culture because of this additional insight, but also because of this predictive capability, because we understand the models. And I'll talk about how that could work shortly. Okay. But I'll give a very simple example, right? So Konica Minolta, very wide portfolio. One of our portfolios is multifunctional devices and multifunctional printers, right? Now, we've been for decades connecting those and monitoring those. And just as a simple example, when something goes wrong with one printer or one functional device in the office, it's isolated. The person that's in that office may be able to work around it, understand the pattern of what's going on. But when it happens thousands and thousands of times over, you get general patterns that you can understand, so that you can actually change the fabric of the design or offer additional services or change something so that you proactively are able to determine what these errors might likely to be. So that's a very simple, and I'll carry on with a more complicated one shortly. As a sort of another example is, it's within the healthcare, right? It's very, very clear, and not just within the UK, many other countries, we all know of the actual benefits of standing and working upright rather than sitting down working for many, many hours. And there is clinical data that shows that. However, in the application of the workplace or the home place, we haven't actually utilized some of that information or some of the ability to understand what exactly about sitting down or standing up, or the frequency, or how we engage with our daily work life and activities that will change. So I think this will be one of the things that will come out very shortly. The simple things like activity-led analysis through sensors and connection will give these insights that we want. So that's perhaps one of the first areas that you'll see it. We see it already. People have wearables that measure their heartbeat and where they're moving and how they're eating and things like that. At some point, somebody's going to get the clever idea. If they couple all of this stuff together, they're going to be able not only to have great insight of the intricacies of what's going on within the people wearing these wearables, but also start predicting associations between changing habits in diet, for instance, how people exercise, and actually track that. So things that are evolving forward culturally, from a human perspective, we may be able to make adjustments for that. Okay. So this is the third hypothesis. Is at the moment, IoT is basically being presented. People create their devices and their sensors. They are connecting them to some platform. They offer you the devices, or they offer you the platform, and they offer you services around that, right? But if you look at the structure of most things in our world, everything from cloud to biological evolution to structures in the universe to information theory, they all feed back on a similar tree, a federated tree structure. So you now have some large players that talk about artificial intelligence and large machines that provide you intelligence, and they represent that as a big piece of equipment, a machine or something like that, that will give you can provide those services. That's just positioning for them to gain the ground. The reality is what will happen is we will have more and more of a distributed intelligence and insight. So not like a great big artificial intelligence acting on our behalf. What we'll have is distributed intelligence. And that distributed intelligence will be able to take on more and more things and understand them concurrently in a way which humans can't do. And they'll be able to help us make better decisions. So it's a digital cortex-like structure is actually already emerging. And in terms of machine learning and things like that and artificial intelligence, there'll be very quickly policies established for interconnectivity. Because what will happen is there'll be a play, and eventually this will become an increasing additional value. The other thing I want to say is that I forgot at the beginning, that when we talk about 40 billion devices and sensors, and then they say 100 billion devices and sensors, what people are forgetting is when you have that many devices and sensors out there, it means it becomes a commodity. They're everywhere, right? Who's going to pay for those sensors and devices? you're going to be paying for something else. You're going to be paying for the collectible, aggregated insight to help you do your daily work or help you at home, help your health, be more educated about what you want to do in the future. Okay. So IoT will eventually, I think, become sort of some connected membrane that will be connectable into our own physical world, but it will also be an interface to a digital world. And I think that the cloud will eventually evolve into some sort of cortex structure that will enable us to be, it will be intelligence-based, not artificially intelligence-based, but a representation of our own insights. Okay. So I said I'd give another example. So this is just a very simple, looks complicated, but very simple example of how these things might work. And to some degree, they already work, right? So an example may be that today, somebody from Manchester wanted to make their way down to Excel in London. They buy a ticket, they plan their journey, and they make their way through here. However, as often is the case with travel, things get in the way. So a train may be delayed, there may be traffic, there may be other sort of instances, there may be other problems that get in the way, that transpire during the process of your activity to stop you. So you have enablers, you buy tickets, you plan, you have people help you get to find the taxi, all of that stuff. But then you have blockers, the things that happen that stop you getting where you're getting. Now, as humans, we sense the immediate things. Humans tend to consider directly about 4 to 6 things in any decision, and there's a subconscious thing up to about 10, right? But what if you were able to use an additional sense that gave you a greater sphere of understanding? So understood that the reason this train is going to be delayed is highly likely because of some other issue somewhere else on a platform that may be 100 miles away, would give you an indication that that's going to happen, right? There may be something that transpires in the city that at the moment is just not recognized. But these things, these levels of understanding could help you plan it. So perhaps you don't come in at Waterloo, perhaps you come in somewhere else and you actually need to get where you want to. So that intelligence, that connectivity, is where I think the real value of where IoT and the subsequent build of a global infrastructure is going to be. So you can call it decision support analytics, or you can call it insight, or whatever, but it will be different to that. And it hasn't really been worked on to great detail. I think what needs to be put into place is very solid policies and information infrastructure and things like one piece of information from one sensor is represented in one way, right? So it has a meaning to that person that built that sensor or that person that consumes the data from it. However, if it's reworded in some other way, it has another sort of useful meaning too. So adaptive context will be also a big play in this. Okay. So that's all great. Digital cortexes, insight, prediction, things, etc., etc. At the end of the day, what people will pay for is the overall value that they see from helping them at work, helping them do the things that they want to do, and empowering them. So I think what we will see is an emergence of an augmented type of genius coming out of this environment, where you will have somebody that consider something, not somebody, that will be able to consider a whole lot more things that you can consider, with greater insight to what you can do, and help you. And there'll be a greater evolution in this area. So less, I think, on conventional AI, classification, rule-based systems, conventional machine learning, but more on distributed intelligence that is more representative and aligned to the human being, to a human status of thought. So it would be like an augmented intelligence or an augmented genius processing capability. So it will give you insight to the things, and you'll be making decisions as if you were somebody that had a IQ of 200 plus or something, you know. But it'll be you still making the decisions. Okay. So I think I've explained some of this already. So so it always boiled down to the principle of understanding the systems in which you operate. You are all part of a system, right? Whether you fit, you consider free will or you don't consider, it's irrelevant. The fact is that we all have a systems and we all act in patterns. We all turn up, get our hair cut on the same day. We all start work at the same time. There are all reasons for that. They're defined patterns. And I think the pattern recognition will become greater and greater importance. Okay. So there's a bottom line here. Konica Minolta is interested in understanding how we can build that so that we can build things like future digital workplaces that are truly empowering for those that go to work, right? To give the flexibility and the insight to enable people to work better, right? Not to control or dictate where people use their information, how they access it, but to really empower them. I think that we really believe that this is a center theme for our own technical strategy. So we have a broad strategy, but the future digital workplace and sense and information automation are really, really key primers for us to work on. And the reason we're here in the London Technology Week is to have and meet people that may have the same interests, those that want to work with us, want to co-innovate, or just want to know more information, or as equally important, who have something to say. We're just as open to hearing what you think in a criticism as opposed to also something quite positive. We're interested in working with the community. As I said at the beginning, we are very, very keen to work in real time in the marketplace. So with that, I can, if I've got any time left, ask some questions. It's a deep subject, I understand that, and it's not what you'd normally hear when people talk about IoT. But we didn't want to come here and just say, IoT, please buy our connected devices, please buy our IoT platform, please come and work on our IoT data. What we wanted to do is give you a better insight, a deeper insight into what our future thoughts are on development. So, yes.
Very much for that. It sounds like the vision you're painting, and I think that there's an awful lot that makes a great deal of sense in that. It's about when you get sort of a genuine Internet of Things, as I would say it, where you have a connected intelligence from lots of different types of devices you hadn't previously thought of making relationships between. Is that something that's necessarily quite a bit further out than what we're seeing now, which tends to be a bit more siloed? And then the sort of second part of that question is what triggers this to happen?
Okay, so the first question. So it's not as far out as you think it is. So, we've heard the term ride the wave, right? So there's a huge amount of investment and interest in IoT. So the subsequent bilateral investments are those areas around IoT, standard telecommunications, people building platforms. So it is something that will happen relatively quickly. So what I'm talking about here is sort of 220, 225, but we can already maximize on the value now by leveraging some of the platforms that are in place and some of the connected devices and sensors that are out there. So you can wait for everything to settle down and we have this massive unstructured, everybody piling and messing around with the data and nobody really able to maximize it. Or you can create communities that are interested on how to make flexible, connected analytics as a starting point to bring this sort of value to the surface quicker and quicker. So I think you'll see more and more of that coming in around about 3 years, but really getting big time around 5 years' time. And what was the second question, sorry?
So actually, you kind of answered part of that thing. So the first question was, is it something that's in the future? And then the second part of the question is, what's going to trigger it to happen? So I guess there's maybe you answered part of that in terms of the kind of people who need to come together, the communities. Maybe the other side is what drives the demand for it.
Yeah, I think ultimately, it's like when people say about cloud, oh, you talk about this subject and they say, yeah, but we're going to have the cloud. Everyone's going to move on to the cloud. All right. So what happens when everybody's moved on to the cloud? Are we all going to go, yeah, right, okay, that's all good. Life's happy. No, we're going to we will demand more. And that's exactly what's going to happen with IoT. See, we're going to demand more from that data and that access.
I was wondering, can you tell us a little more about the projects that you're actually working on, please?
Yeah, well, so I can tell you some things, okay? So we believe that, that there will be hubs of intelligence will established that will be centralized around near-field, localized intelligence, digital workplace, sensors in the building, localized, and then things that are available via the cloud, right? So at the moment, a lot of companies are citing, let's connect to my big platform, hoping that their big platform will get bigger and bigger. So we are very much interested in how to extend hubs within the office space so that they become much more of a proxy and intelligence internally within the operating environment of your work or your home or hospital that will provide that. So, and that is something we are very seriously focused on at the moment, and I mean very seriously. Other areas which we're working on, of course, so we have a whole array of digital connected equipment, right? So clearly, there is just the fact that they're in the field and we're scanning people and taking x-rays and we're helping doctors and surgeons with their information system, PACS systems, if people know what that is. We are already building an intelligence backbone to offer additional analytics, insight, and increasingly decision support systems around that. So just a few.
Are you using machine learning?
So machine learning, so we have some research going on machine learning, and we're looking at various different things like the usual machine learning stuff, whether you be rule-based or whether it should be classification, whether it should decision trees, neural networks, etc. That's conventional stuff that we and many others are working on. However, there's some additional focus around predictive APIs we think are very important. Those things that you can plug into centralized or localized networks to help you provide decisions. The machine learning is, yeah, let's have some AI in the office. But that means hardwired, you need to know about how to set that up. It's very, even though the model's large, the actual value stream to a user is quite narrow. What we think is that decision support systems will have a unified way in which they can connect data and provide much more adaptive value to individual decisions or individual predictions. It become much more user-friendly. So somebody that doesn't know about neural networks or backpropagation or anything like that can say, I just want to know the likelihood of getting from A to B, or I just like the likelihood of this investment going as far as that, or I would just like to know the likelihood of my room being, my conference room in my office being booked the next 2 weeks so that I can move things around for a large conference I want to hold. So yeah, we are. You're welcome.
Hi, do you think this increased connectivity will increase innovation, and how would it affect your IP, intellectual property strategy?
Yeah, so that's a super question. So with increased connectivity comes increased mush, right? So the fact that we're going to have more and more devices is great, but when you go looking for a presentation or an email you did 6 months ago, I sit there for ages trying to find it, right? How it's not going to be any different, because nobody's building the ability, right, to be able to access the main, only the individual strands, you know, the large company platform this, large company platform that, small company platform that. Nobody's thinking about how to overcome this ridiculous problem we have with leveraging data and the connectivity. So individual streams, yeah, it'll be more creative. I think it'll help us, but we're just going to have more and more mush coming along with it too. And that's where the value proper statement, I think, is how do we really, before it gets completely out of control, how do we build universal platforms that help people to really do it? And I don't think that's going to come from one company or another. I think that will end up only happening with government-led sponsorship of consortiums that really fix that problem, right? There was, you know, semantic web. There was, on predicate logic, how you connect data. That was a reasonably good effort. It had problems with caching and things like that, but it was really good, right? But in the end of the day, there wasn't enough buy-in because it was too difficult to overcome. There wasn't enough intergovernment focus on that. I'm optimistic there will be some sort of semantic web type of renaissance kick off shortly in response to the need because it's getting bigger and bigger. But so connectivity will improve some things and it will just make things a whole lot worse.
I thought I heard you say they're government-led sponsorship or something like that.
Yes.
Yet this is all happening fairly quickly. So
yes.
For me, that feels like a fairly large gap.
Yes. Governments are like that, they react when it gets really messy, and the problem is that the clever people that work in industry are so busy with the hype, so busy running forward with the pack of rats, they want to get there, right, that they're forgetting that when they get there, there's not going to be enough food to feed on, right? It's all going to fall apart. They need to readdress, in a way that we're trying to do, and we're not the only ones. Hang on, there's some other things here that need to be sorted. There's some other really big opportunities that actually are much, much bigger than the IoT. Much bigger, much, much bigger. I'm optimistic we'll get there, but as usual, it's always some, lag behind it. We're starting to think about the mess we're in now that was created 20 years ago, and I think we're going to be doing the same. But it will resolve itself eventually, I hope. Ever the optimist. Okay.
Hi. Where do you see the biggest value coming from and being realized in the sense of, is it consumer markets, is it businesses, or is it smarter cities led by government?
So I think it will be business markets first. So I know we've got connected fridges and watches and all that consumer. That's the simple stuff that you can manage and we can create standard platforms on. At the end of the day, the first to capitalize on this will be the people that know by putting the investment in, they can make some profit return on it. So it will be the larger companies that will invest in, or the larger organizations, because they'll be able to make predictions that have a significant impact on them and their strategy. Going forward, that will evolve out. What I see happening is that you will have these hubs of intelligence that will create new business logic, new applications, new ways of doing things. And then the system will recognize that they are very, very successful. We're like an ecosystem, really. And they will then evolve up into more of a cloud-type accessible thing. And that will be the sort of growth area of these new predictive or decision support. And that will be consumed by the consumer. From an industry perspective, I think we are pretty much dictated just by the existing flow of the IoT business, where the sensors are connected. And that makes sense by the type of sensors that we have, the ability to maintain energy within them, the connectivity at distance. But I think that will change. So logistics and healthcare are already driving forward, a little bit more on retail. But from the new era, and I'm not talking like Terminator or anything like that. In any way, it's not going to be like that, right? The assisted decision support systems or predictive logic, it'll be the larger companies that establish that first. The ones that have money to engineer it in, and then when it becomes standard and it doesn't need so much engineering, it will then become consumer-based, I think. Sorry?
What's your view on smarter cities?
It's a really positive thing, and it's a really good first step. And it is thought leadership, and some companies have, either capitalized on it or just been great in that area. And it is a great start to it. However, they're still falling prey on the fact that it's serialized connective logic. They're not building adaptive platforms so that stuff can be utilized elsewhere. So an example could be tremors. So there are tremors, and we have tremor sensors in earthquake cities, San Francisco, Tokyo. As the tremor moves through, we have sensors in different buildings. Everybody uses those. A smart city will use those to alert people. But nobody's using the intelligence to work out how the energy flows across the country, through the cities, and what sort of masses accelerate or decrease the human risk. For an example, you've got a big mountain in the way, and you've got an earthquake coming your way. That energy can be reflected off that mountain, and it can end up, so what you think was a relatively small tremor, by the time it gets to a city or a small town, can be quite significant. But nobody's doing that modelling. Now that is taking and sharing across cities and countries on how to maximise the data that we have and the information flow. Nobody's really looking at the actual transition of the energy and how the buildings may react, the resonant frequency of a building to the amount of energy that's being transferred for it. So all in all, it's a great starting point, but I think we need to build on it.
I guess this follows on a little bit from the last question, but how long do you think it's going to take for that transition from larger businesses to kind of smaller independent businesses? And I guess in that question, it's when do you think you're going to see a cultural shift where it's not just people who have a vested interest in technology and think about it and are developing it, but it's ordinary people who are using this to shape the way that they live and work?
Well, I think at the moment it is power of the many. It really is. So consumers are dictating, but consumers operate on an individual basis. They're themselves, their families, their friends, their city or their town, right? So that will continue to drive the ever-increasing access and use of connected data and services to an individual's benefit. What will happen is when we get to a point, enough central mass that we're able to offer much more to a wider spectrum of group of people, that's when the businesses will start to really take him forward. At the moment, there are real value in connected devices and wearables, and there is some relative value to larger companies that are offering these sort of services to larger companies. I think what will happen is as this matures and the degree in which the value is accelerated to a wider field of people, the bigger enterprises will start working on it more seriously. But that will then ripple down to consumers very, very quickly, I think. Okay, I think I've well run out of time. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate your very valuable questions. Thank you.